You know, I was fortunate enough to grow up in a house where books were really valued. I mean, they were in piles all over the house, and I took to reading at a very early age. And as I look back over the years, I can see there were always some key books that changed how I saw the whole world, moments that changed me. And today on Authentic, I'll tell you about one that completely revolutionized how I think about God. Don't go away. I'll be right back. I was just 17 years old and recovering from the considerable sticker shock that comes from buying overpriced college textbooks. I mean, why does one book have to cost more than $100? And I mean, this is back in the 1980s. But one of those new textbooks really grabbed my attention one night, and I was sitting on my bed reading it in my dorm room. Now, I know I've got this book somewhere down in the basement. I kept it because it represents such an important moment in my own personal development. And I actually went down to the basement to try and find it so I could bring it into studio and show it to you. But unfortunately, it's been lost in that mountain of books that's been sitting down there for a lot of years. So today, I don't actually have the book in my hands, but thanks to the magic of Kindle, I can still show you why this moment all those years ago was so important to me. At the age of 17, it kind of blew my mind that there were very intelligent people out there who struggled to believe that they actually existed. I mean, all you really need to do is slam your hand in a car door and you know you exist. You know that the physical world is a very real place. So, as a kid, it came as a bit of a surprise to discover that some really bright people actually doubted that they existed. And I'd never considered the kinds of questions that philosophers have been wrestling with for centuries. And maybe some of these questions are the product of having too much time on your hands. Then again, maybe they're not. So the way the problem presents itself is kind of like this. You and I experience this world through our senses. We see the world, we hear the world, we feel the world, and so on. But how do you know that your senses aren't just deceiving you? How do you know that your eyes are actually seeing something that's really there? How do you know it's not just a trick of your mind? I mean, when your eyes are damaged and you can no longer see the world around you, how do you know that the world still exists? Well, even though you're blind, right, you can still hear the world, so you know there's something out there. But what if you also happen to be deaf, like Helen Keller? Well, then you could still feel the world, and the touch of another human being would let you know that you're not alone. But then what if all your senses suddenly failed you? What if you had no means whatsoever of detecting the outside world? Could you still know that the world existed and that your existence was real? This is a problem that actually goes all the way back to ancient Greece, where guys like Parmenides and Democritus and Empedocles tried to grapple with the nature of reality. And one thing that some of them managed to determine was the fact that you really can't trust the evidence of your senses because, well, your senses aren't 100% reliable. So, for example, I remember my biology teacher in the 11th grade suddenly stopping his lecture mid-sentence and saying, "Hey, did any of you kids hear that just now?" Now, we didn't hear anything. But out in the hallway, somebody had just dropped a broom on the floor and they made a huge racket. But surprisingly, most of us didn't hear it happen. And what the teacher was doing was pointing out the fact that our brains make important decisions about our sensory input. They filter information so that what you see and what you hear is just a fraction of what's actually going on around you. You only perceive the really important stuff. Now, that's a really useful mechanism because if you had no filter in your brain, if you saw literally everything around you all the time, and you heard everything around you all the time, well, that would drive you crazy. It's just too much sensory input. So our brains become selective. But at the same time, our brains will also fill in details when important information seems to be missing, so that it helps us make sense out of what we're looking at. Your brain will literally just make something up. So, for example, if I write my name on a sheet of paper or put it on the screen, but I only give you the shadow of the letters, most of you are still going to see my name. It reads Shawn. Even though the letters aren't really there. They're not. Your brain fills in the gaps because your brain needs to make sense out of what it's looking at. It's trying to do a good job for you. So we've always known that sensory perception is very, very useful. And our experience of the world becomes severely impaired if we start to lose our senses. But at the same time, we now know that our senses are not entirely reliable. Now, if you doubt that, all you need to do is visit a court of law. Go to a court case. Take 10 separate witnesses to a crime, put them all on the stand, and all 10 of them are going to remember the events slightly differently. In fact, if all 10 stories match perfectly, and all the witnesses remember the very same details right down to the letter, well, in that case, you're going to suspect they're guilty of collusion. Human perception just doesn't work that way. So we know that our senses are anything but perfect. And if your senses are, well, somewhat unreliable, how do you know just how unreliable they are? How exactly would you figure that out? I mean, we have 5 basic senses, and we can compare the sensory input from each of them, but what if they're just all wrong? I mean, what if I see the color red and you see the color blue when we're looking at the very same thing? But both of us just call it blue because, well, that's what we learned when we were kids. That's how we were raised. How in the world would you ever know that you and I are not seeing exactly the same thing? Or what if you and I have a completely different set of colors altogether? We have individual color spectrums. And you can see things that I can't possibly begin to imagine, and vice versa. How would you ever know that? Again, I know it sounds like I've got way too much time on my hands, but those are the kinds of questions human beings have actually wrestled with now for thousands of years. So there I was, 17 years old, sitting on my bed in my dorm room, reading the Meditation of René Descartes for the very first time. And he's agonizing over these kinds of questions. And suddenly they did seem important, because the nature of the universe and the nature of reality have a lot to say about how I'm going to choose to live my life. If everything around me is just an illusion, if nothing I experience is actually real, then I can just live however I please, because why would it even matter? But if the universe is real, and it has order and logic to it, if it follows rock-solid principles, well, that's going to determine what it means to live an authentic human existence. And I don't want to be found recklessly contradicting reality. Now, to be sure, we can thank the Greeks for casting a lot of doubt on whether or not the world is actually real. For example, Plato suggested the imperfect world we perceive with our senses is nothing but a fuzzy representation of a higher, greater reality, an immutable, immovable universe that exists out there somewhere beyond the reach of our senses. Now, you don't want to go away, because right after this I'm going to come back and ask, why should that matter to you?
Here at the Voice of Prophecy, we're committed to creating top-quality programming for the whole family, like our audio adventure series, Discovery Mountain. Discovery Mountain is a Bible-based program for kids of all ages and backgrounds. Your family will enjoy the faith-building stories from this small mountain summer camp and town. With 24 seasonal episodes every year and fresh content every week, there's always a new adventure just on the horizon.
So here I was, 17 years old, wrestling with all these strange new questions and watching this great philosopher Descartes agonize over the reality and meaning of his own existence. Here's what he said. But what then am I? A thing that thinks. What is that? A thing that doubts, understands, affirms, denies, wills, refuses, and that also imagines and senses. So here's what he's basically saying. Strip away all your senses, your sight, your hearing, your touch. Just take it all away. Descartes argues that you would still have your thoughts. And those thoughts somehow mean that you are real, that you exist. And that's what gave us Descartes' famous saying, cogito ergo sum. In English, I think, therefore I am. Now, it's certainly not an airtight philosophy. And there were lots of people who refuted it, including the English philosopher John Locke, who argued that, well, we all come into this world with what amounts to a dial tone in our brains. That's not how he put it. He called it tabula rasa. We have an empty slate, a blank slate when we're born. And he argued that none of us actually does any thinking until our senses give us something to think about. But really that's not the important thing for what I want to get to today. What's important is the way that René Descartes suddenly changed my picture of absolutely everything. I remember actually getting some tears in my eyes at 17 when I finished reading his meditations because, well, it was such a beautiful thing to read. And it was the first time ever I thought to myself, you know something? Religious faith really does make sense. And again, I know I've way oversimplified his arguments, and there are lots of counter-arguments that blow his thesis apart. But it was the first time it occurred to me that faith might be reasonable. Now, I'd been raised in a church-going family, but I'd also gone to a public high school where matters of faith were challenged on almost a daily basis. And now at the university, I was suddenly hearing voices that consistently attacked the worldview of all my religious ancestors every single day, even though, ironically enough, that old biblical worldview was the reason that universities even exist. You see, way back when, once upon a time, there was a consistent belief that the universe is orderly, and people assumed that God must be out there somewhere. So universities were kind of made up of different colleges. A college to study math, another one to study biology, another one to study astronomy, and so on. And the idea was that all of these different disciplines would individually shed light on the nature of God's universe and teach us something about who God is. So, theology was said to be the queen of the sciences, and every new discovery added to this universal body of knowledge about who God is, hence the name university. Now, in some places, that universal science was actually said to be philosophy and not theology, but it all amounts to pretty much the same thing. The universe back then was considered to be orderly, and you could learn a lot about the nature of reality and the nature of God simply by studying the natural order. So there I was in an institution that for the most part ironically denied the reason that it existed in the first place, and I had people telling me on a daily basis that faith is nothing but superstition. They were telling me that reason will always be better than faith any day of the week. But then I read Descartes, and I realized that some of the greatest minds in the universe have wrestled with the same things that you and I wrestle with. And for the most part, up until the postmodern philosophers and the nihilists of the 19th century, most of those brilliant people found that faith was utterly compatible with reality. The universe, they said, is orderly and predictable, and there's a reason for its existence. And if you and I just apply our God-given brains in a reasonable manner, there's a lot for us to discover. And if you had no senses at all, Descartes argued, you would still have your thoughts. And where in the world did those thoughts come from? Is it possible that apart from your sensory perception, God put those thoughts in your brain? Now, to my 17-year-old mind, this was all a very beautiful thing. And again, I know that Descartes' thinking has been challenged. I get that thousands of times. And like any human philosophy, there are plenty of logical flaws to be found. But still, it demonstrated one really important idea. Faith does not have to be blind. And you and I were brought into existence with orderly, logical minds. And I guess the reason I'm emphasizing this is because of the way that so many people ridicule matters of faith in this postmodern world of ours. I mean, all you have to do is hop on Twitter for a few minutes and you'll find lots of angry atheists mocking Jews and Christians for believing in what they call an imaginary friend in the sky. And these people are quite adamant that the only reason you and I believe in God is because we read about it in an old book of fairy tales. And what happens to a lot of people of faith is that they find themselves trying to respond to that accusation with a bunch of people who have no idea what this book is all about. They have no idea what it actually says. I can assure you that most of the armchair critics, I mean, not all of them, but most, are largely ignorant of what the Bible actually says. Most of them are just repeating stuff they've heard, or they're actually copying and pasting the ignorant memes created by people who have no real understanding of this topic. Now, I want to be fair because there really are some intelligent, well-informed critics of faith, and I personally have a lot of respect for people who have honest questions. But at the same time, I've seen that most of the armchair critics on social media quickly fall apart or just go out and block you if you ask them a few simple questions. Or sometimes they double down on their mockery because they don't have a logical argument. As a preacher friend of mine used to say, these people are down on what they're not up on. So, now let me show you something that the Bible actually says. And I think you're going to find this kind of interesting. We know historically that the Apostle Paul was a student of Gamaliel, a famous and well-respected teacher of the law. So Paul was known for having this razor-sharp mind capable of producing these irrefutable arguments. And at one point, as Paul is writing to the early Christians who lived in the city of Rome, this is what he says. It's found in Romans chapter 12, beginning in verse 1. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice. Now, we might have to come back to that statement another day because it's kind of cool. A living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. Notice, it's not irrational. It's not blind, he says. It's reasonable. Verse 2. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Now, that short passage assures me that something is wrong with our human minds the way they are right now. We have a serious mental deficiency. Now, that really shouldn't come as a surprise because the misery of living in this world with 7 billion other people should tell us something is wrong with the way that we're running this planet. So what Paul is saying is that our will, our minds, have fallen out of harmony with the will of God, and our minds need to be renewed or renovated. But still, I want you to notice that he doesn't say, please shelve your intellect and empty your mind and just blindly accept whatever I tell you. On the contrary, he's saying that discovering God and following God is a reasonable act. In other words, there is order to this universe. And if there are big problems with the way that my life presents itself in this world, then the problem lies with faulty reasoning on the part of human beings. The problem with this world boils down to a flaw with humanity, not with the God who established the world in the first place. So, we're going to take another quick break, and I'm going to come right back, and you don't want to miss where we're going next.
Life can throw a lot at us. Sometimes we don't have all the answers. But that's where the Bible comes in. It's our guide to a more fulfilling life. Here at the Voice of Prophecy, we've created the Discover Bible Guides to be your guide to the Bible. They're designed to be simple, easy to use, and provide answers to many of life's toughest questions. And they're absolutely free. So jump online now, or give us a call and start your journey of discovery.
The real problem in this world is that you and I are fatally flawed. There's something wrong with us. But it's a flaw that you can actually ferret out. You can discover it, and you can correct it by allowing God to renew your mind. Now, I want to be careful that I don't now reduce the words of the Bible to some kind of cosmic philosophy proof book, because much to the chagrin of the ancient Greeks, this book is not really a list of logical proofs. I mean, you can draw lots of logical arguments out of the material in this book, but that's not what it is. That was actually something that early Christians excelled at. They tried to make this a list of proofs, because after Jews and Christians had established themselves in North Africa in the city of Alexandria, believers took pagan philosophy and they tried to harmonize it with a biblical point of view. They were trying to prove that the Bible is also a book of logic. But it's important to remember that this book is more than that. It's not just a list of logical arguments. This is a relational book. It's the story of a creator God and His relationship with the human race. An account of how God has been interacting with a planet that has essentially turned its back on Him. This is the story of a real thinking, feeling, personal God who interacts with real thinking, feeling people, no matter how flawed we happen to be. Now, like any story, that doesn't necessarily lend itself well to just making lists of philosophical, logical proofs. So I want to be careful here. And yet the Bible does emphasize that we can have reasonable thought. While it teaches us that God's ways are too high for me to fully grasp, it also teaches me that I can understand God more than I might first suspect. Let me show you an interesting statement from the book of Jeremiah, because this is really kind of profound. This is from Jeremiah chapter 9. Thus says the Lord, let not the wise man glory in his wisdom, let not the mighty man glory in his might, nor let the rich man glory in his riches. So here you have a caution toward humility, and I suspect that a lot of Greek philosophers would agree with this. When it says, do not glory in your wisdom, you can almost hear Socrates saying, I know that I know nothing. Because the beginning of wisdom is to admit that, well, you don't have any. But the Bible teaches that wisdom is possible. You and I can have a real understanding of the world, and at the same time, we shouldn't let that fluff up our egos. Here's what it says. Let not the wise man glory in his wisdom. Let not the mighty man glory in his might, nor let the rich man glory in his riches. But let him who glories glory in this. Now, don't miss what this is about to say. That he understands and knows me. That I am the Lord, exercising loving kindness, judgment, and righteousness in the earth. Now, I hope that made sense. The faith of the Bible is a reasonable faith. In fact, faith lives right up here in your God-given mind, and there is order to the universe because an orderly God created it for a purpose. And by exercising your God-given reasonable mind, you are meant to discover who God is. And that's the reason you were born with this insatiable sense of curiosity. Now, to know God is not just a matter of knowing stuff about Him. It's not just a list of facts. To know God is to actually know Him as a friend, to experience a relationship with Him. Which takes me back to the very beginning of the Bible, where God creates the world in the first place, and then He steps back and says, that is very good. And that thought takes me back to the 8th Psalm, where the poet looks up into the night sky and he's blown away by what he sees. He has this sense of awe when he sees the universe, and it's a sense of awe for the one who made it all. Listen, I know that you've been told that the world just came into being all by itself, even though we know that's a scientific impossibility. And I know that you've been told that the Bible is nothing but magical thinking, that this book doesn't make sense. And I also know that some of you have been told that if God does exist, He's so far beyond comprehension that He exists in this strange realm of mystery, in a place that your feeble human mind simply can't go. But that is not what this book says. There is order to the universe, and there is something solid there for you to discover. Maybe the medieval Jewish philosopher Maimonides said it best when he confronted the people who argued that God's interactions with humanity were beyond comprehension. That can't be true, he said. His argument was that we were created in the image of God, and if human beings do what they do for logical reasons, are we really going to say that God acts irrationally? Are we really going to say that God doesn't have a reasonable purpose for His actions? That just doesn't make sense. So it stands to reason that if God exists, and if He is infinite the way that people who have interacted with Him in history have described, then there's just no way you're going to understand everything about Him. But to suggest that God is irrational or that you can't understand anything about Him, that's not true, and it's not what this book teaches, not even close. This ancient record teaches that God is good, and this book teaches that the world He made was originally good. And this book teaches that you and I were made in His image to fulfill a purpose that you can understand, at least enough to start living an authentic human existence. I'll be right back.
Dragons, beasts, cryptic statues. Bible prophecy can be incredibly vivid and confusing. If you've ever read Daniel or Revelation and come away scratching your head, you're not alone. Our free Focus on Prophecy guides are designed to help you unlock the mysteries of the Bible and deepen your understanding of God's plan for you and our world. Study online or request them by mail and start bringing prophecy into focus today.
Hey, take it from me, a recovering heathen, a guy whose first-year college textbook suddenly showed me that the existence of God is a reasonable proposition, and you really don't have to put your brain on a shelf to experience Him. I'm Shawn Boonstra, and this has been Authentic. Thanks for joining me.